process. It goes every which direction, but appropriations pretty much follows this. Federal highways and the other administrations within the USDOT are working on their 2017 budget now, which is kind of difficult because we don't have an authorization act, so we don't know about our funding. But sometime around Thanksgiving to that Christmas, that period there, our budget will be finished. And then they're consolidated into the USDOT budget, which in turn becomes the president's budget, and it goes to Congress on or before the first Monday in February. And I think inside the Beltway, it's a big deal. Probably outside of the Beltway, not that many people pay attention. But, you know, and the president's budget's a proposal. It's not unusual to hear it's dead on arrival because Congress is who has controls of the spending for the nation. And so it's their job. Now, once the president's budget goes to Congress, the first thing they do is come up with the House and Senate budget committees or come up with a budget resolution. The budget resolution is a blueprint of spending. Nothing small. It doesn't deal in any small numbers. You know, they do not mention like federal highways at all. It says USDOT, X number of dollars, that type of thing. But the budget resolution is supposed to be passed by April 15th. Some years it is, some years it's not. Some years we do not even get one. It's just whatever kind of a mood Congress is in. And so if the budget resolution is passed or if it's not passed, the House begins work on the budget first. Again, this is according to the Constitution. So the House will begin their work on the budget. Once they come up and pass, once the whole House passes an Appropriations Act, and there aren't one great big Appropriations Act for every department. There are 11 separate Appropriations Acts. And of course, the one that falls on USDOT is Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and related agencies. So once an Appropriations Act is passed by the subcommittee, it goes to the floor of the House. If the House passes it, it's sent over to the Senate. The Senate keeps the House number and basically throws the rest away because they go through the process all over again. They have their priorities. So once the Senate, full Senate passes an Appropriations Act, then it goes to conference. And the conference committee, their job is to come up with an Appropriations Act that will pass both houses and go to the president. And if they do not pass an Appropriations Act, what's their next step? In fact, we're operating under one right now. Continuing resolution. Okay, it'll be a continuing resolution for X number of days. I think the current one goes until December the 11th. And all spending is done according to how many days that is. So from October 1st to December 11th must be about 72 days. So the way they do spending for the government is everyone except federal highways gets spending at 72/365 of the amount they had available the previous year. And so under a continuing resolution, anybody have any guesses how long since we've had appropriations finished on October 1, ready to go? Never. You're more cynical than I am. almost that bad. 1993 was the last year we had appropriations all set to go. And of course, they're in a CR, continuing resolution right now. We may have one or two more, or three more, who knows? Sometimes they just roll it up into one big continuing resolution and go for the whole year. So it's hard to tell what's going to happen. Now, when Federal Highways does their budget, since we have contract authority, we only need to put about the things on this slide in it. We have to put an ob limit, even though when we have an authorization act, it usually has the ob limit in it. But we put that in. We put in a limit on our administrative expenses because we're given an amount of line of credit for administrative expenses. And of course, we'd like to spend 100% if we could. And we request that. We request a liquidating cash amount so we have enough to pay the bills in the coming year. And we have two programs that do not have contract authority. The projects of national and regional significance and the tribal high priority projects program. Neither one of those have contract authority, so they're at the whim of the appropriators to get funding, and they have never been funded since MAP 21 was passed back in 2012. So if you're one of the people that has charge of that program, you don't have any work to do. These are the appropriators. You remember earlier I showed you the authorizers. These are a different group of people. It's one of the most sought after positions in Congress because you control the purse strings of the nation if you're on appropriations. And very seldom do you see the same person on both an authorizing committee and an appropriations committee. One of the few people that's ever done both was Senator Bond. Well, he's retired now from Missouri. He once sat on appropriations and authorization committees. So Missouri was in excellent shape in those days. So these are the folks that are working on appropriations right now. And if we get an Appropriations Act, they'll be the ones that do it. Federal spending is divided into two parts. We have the mandatory side of the budget and the discretionary side of the budget. The mandatory side, Congress has very little discretion at changing the spending amounts. If they try to change the spending amounts, they have to change law. And that's something they don't really like to do in most cases, because it's hot button issues on this side. You know, Social Security, Medicare, and the entitlement programs, they hate to mess with that stuff. So on the other side, the discretionary side of the budget, Congress can wheel and deal all they want. You know, cut it, raise it, do anything. And we're on that side of the budget. We've never been subject to the cuts and everything. For one reason, because we have contract authority. So the money holds up from year to year. The other thing is that for a long time we had what they called firewalls that prohibited Congress from cutting the highway program. And the other, I guess the third reason is that transportation, the highway program is very bipartisan. And so that keeps us from being up and down and up and down. If you ever work for defense, they either have more money and they know what to do with, or they don't know where their next dollar is coming from. It's never even funding. For 2015, the year we just ended, we had a continuing resolution that went again till December the 11th. On the 11th, they passed a 6-day continuing resolution. Whenever you see them pass a short continuing resolution, it means they're pretty close to meeting or being in agreement between the Senate and the House. And of course, between the 11th and the 17th, they rolled everything together into what they call an omnibus bill. And that was the budget we operated on this year, or for fiscal year 2015. Now, with 2016, we're on the first step right now. We have a continuing resolution till December the 11th. Who knows what's going to happen next? Of course, when the omnibus was passed, the ob limit was $40.2 billion. That was what the ob limit that covers the state's apportionments and your allocations and all that type of thing. The ob limit for Federal Highways Administration was $426 million. It looked great on paper because it was more than we asked for. But then Congress had a few things they wanted us to do with it, so we didn't get to spend it like we wanted to. Liquidating cash was $40.9 billion, and the Tiger program, which is not part of the federal aid program, although it uses all the eligibilities from the federal aid program, was provided with $500 million to fund that program. So the Appropriations Act, basically have the Appropriations Act, it gives us an ob limit and it gives us cash from the trust fund so the bills can be paid. The two main things. Now the ob limit. Basically the ob limit's a budgetary mechanism to control federal spending for contract authority programs. We need to have an ob limit if Congress wants to control how much we spend, because we've given the states the money or the line of credit on October 1st. And Congress does it through legislation. They either do it, well, they always do it through the Appropriations Act, but when we have an Authorization Act, usually every year of the Authorization Act has an obligation limit, and normally the appropriators go along with what's in the Authorization Act dollar for dollar. So we usually know fairly close what's the ob limit will be for the coming year when we have a multi-year Authorization Act. And of course the theory is that ob limits are responsive to current budget policies. Ob limit is good for 1 year in most circumstances. There is some ob limit out there that's available until expended, but probably 98% of the ob limit is good for 1 year. You either use it that year or you lose it. You don't get to carry it over normally. It's a state-by-state limit. When Utah receives their ob limit, you get X number of dollars. That covers all your apportionments. It's up to the DOT then how to use it. You can spread it around any way you want to, but you can only use the amount you've received. You can't go over that amount. And it applies to the total program. It applies to all your apportionments. Now, if you get an allocated grant, it'll come with its own ob limit. So we're talking about the formula programs here because it's the biggest part of the amount you will receive for the federal aid program. Now, when we distribute ob limit, when the people that have been in the class before, it's a paper, it shows step by step. Congress spells that all out in legislation, how we have to distribute the ob limit and the contract authority. And so we always begin with the funds that are not subject to the ob limit. There's emergency relief funds and $639 million of the National Highway Performance Program are not subject to the OB limit. So as soon as you get it, you can use it if you want to. Then we do the programs that have 100% OB limit. So whatever their contract authority is or their line of credit, they get an equal amount of OB limit. And Federal Highways is always first in the list, and we seldom get 100%, but we have the potential to. And of course, the rest of those programs, they're other programs from administrative funds. That's usually what happens with the amount we're allowed to spend. They tell us what to do with our administrative funds. This one here, this is something that we talk a little bit about. We have to set aside a limitation for unobligated balances from previous years for allocated programs. And this is probably, if you've ever heard of August redistribution. In the summer, usually June, we send out a notice to all the division offices. And we want to know, and anybody, I shouldn't say only division offices, because it's anybody that uses money from the highway program. We send this notice out and we say, how much OB limit are you not going to use this year? And there's a form with the notice to fill out, like how much OB limit you're going to return, because it's good for 1 year. If you're not going to use it, we want it back. You can't leave it on the table, because if it stays on the table, Congress will not give you more next year. You know, it's use it or lose it. So then it's supposed to be in August, but sometimes it's in September. We do what we call redistribution. We take all this OB limit that's been returned and we distribute it out to the states based on their unobligated balances. So it's a proportional distribution, and this adds on to the lump sum amount a state received for their formula programs, for your apportionments. States are not giving back the OB limit that goes to their apportionments. Historically, that amounts about 92% of what you receive for your apportioned programs. So you always have at least 8% or so that you can't obligate. So you're carrying that over. So you're not going to give that back. But the allocated programs return a lot of money. Federal Lands returns a lot. The IRS returns a lot. They use our money to collect the taxes and everything, and they don't use it all. They return this obligation limit. So we give it out to the states so they may obligate more of their apportioned line of credit. So did you receive some this past year? About 20 million additional. So whatever you were able to obligate with your OB limit for the year, you received about 20 million, the ability to obligate 20 million additional dollars. And this is a good thing. You know, it helps the states. Now, a state does not need to take August redistribution. Some states do not, because they do not have the match. You know, that 80-20 match, or in your case, it would be 93-7. But that reason, one state I know of, for some reason, their state legislator made them quit having shelf projects, you know, projects that were set to go, but they were kind of waiting on the shelf. And so they didn't take as much as they were entitled to 1 year. So usually a state will take whatever we can give them. If we have $2 billion to return in August redistribution, we've probably had requests for 5 to 7 billion. So we never have enough to satisfy everyone. So that's why, because what happens is the allocated programs, they get up, they can't obligate the funds. So they have to give the ob limit back in August. Then when the new fiscal year starts, they have this line of credit, but no way to spend it because they do not have the ob limit. So in the new year, for all the ob limit they gave back, we have to give them new ob limits. So perhaps this year they'll obligate those particular funds. But this is every year we do August redistribution.
I was just going to mention one thing with that too, so you understand that it's project specific, that we submit a list of projects that constitutes that. So we this year requested $50 million, but also had a list of projects, to justify that $50 million.
That's a good point. Yeah, you just can't willy-nilly say, I want X number of dollars. You submit a list because they want to make sure that you're going to use this. But we always get somebody that messes up. It'll come up to September 30th, and somebody will call and say, we have $2 million we can't use. And so, if they do this at 4:30 in the afternoon, the East Coast is shut down. And the people in budget and finance start calling westward until they get someone that can use it, a state, because out here, you're still working when we're all going home. So, but we have to get rid of every penny of this leftover ob limit. So it's busy for those people. So 20 million, that was a pretty good amount.
We request a lot more than that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it is good.
The way we determine how much ob limit is going to be distributed is, as we go through these steps, we calculate a ratio. And it's a ratio of how much ob limit is left to the total of what has begun, So when we do ratios, and this year it was, fiscal year 2015, it was 93.9%, which is high. It's the last couple, 3 years, it's been running in the 93, 94% range, which is really above the historical. And you look back to Safety Lou, we had some years of Safety Lou when the ob limit was about 85% of what you were receiving in a line of credit. So these last couple of years have not been 100%, but still they've been up there where you're carrying over less than what the historical percentage was. You may go your whole career and never see 100%. I've seen it once, and that's in it'll be 25 years this summer. But so you could easily, especially the way finances are now, go a whole career and never see 100% ob limit. So it rarely happens anymore. And of course, the way we figure out our allocated programs, we take your contract authority, multiply it times the percentage. That's how much you're allowed to obligate. We have this thing called lop-off, which just seems to blow everybody's mind how it works. At one time, the allocated programs, if you applied for a $100 million grant, you received $100 million. And then if the ob limit was at 92%, you were allowed to obligate 92% of that, and you carried over 8%. Well, the only way you could carry over the 8% was to use your formula ob limit. Now, the states hated it and they used to call it the allocation penalty. So they went to Congress and they said, do something about this. So Congress did. Well, what they did, instead of you getting the 100 million, they would cut it off to 92 million because of the 92% ob limit. So you received 92% of the contract authority. Your ob limit was 92%. You got to obligate it all. So probably not the way the states wanted it fixed, but it was the congressional fix. And this little part they lop off, which is in the middle column, that is all added up in the third column over, and it's distributed to the states as certain other authorized funds. If you see that notice come through, it's lop-off funds. Now the thing is, it comes with no ob limit. If you want to use it as a state, you have to use your formula ob limit. So it didn't go anywhere. It was like a big circle. Back around, we're right where we started again. The only thing that's probably better with this way is that these lop-off funds you receive, these certain other authorized funds, have the same eligibilities as the STP funds. So they're very, very flexible. You can use them for almost anything. So that's a benefit. And of course, for your formula programs, the amount of ob limit and contract authority that's left gets divided into each other. You get another ratio, and of course, it's the exact same as the one before. That's what they've been doing, running about equal. For those of you that are new and maybe not been in the working here very long or whatever, you can compare ob limit to like fishing, okay? It's like you buy a fishing license, you go out to fish, and you're allowed to catch a certain number of fish. That's what ob limit's at. There's a whole pond full of fish, but on October 1st, we restocked the pond and put in more fish than ever, and then we send an ob limit out that says, of all those fish in the pond, you can catch 18 of them, but only 18, but it's your choice. So that's the same way we do with ob limit. We send the ob limit here to UDOT. They can use it any way they want to on their apportion programs. So you can catch the 18, no more. You got it that many of any mixture of fish. And then of course with August redistribution, basically we give you the ability to obligate more funds. So basically the catch limit is raised to 20. So instead of being able to catch 18 fish, you're now allowed to catch 2 more and make it 20. So that's kind of an analogy of how the ob limit works. And of course, I talked about this already. In a partial year such as we're in right now, the government's in, we have to divide the ob limit up of what can be used. Now, right now, we operate until tomorrow. So there was an amount of ob limit for 29 days. This next extension, which they haven't agreed on yet, is supposed to be a short one, which makes me think that they have a bill they think they can get through to authorize us. But during that time, whatever time, if this next extension is 15 days, November 29th? Oh, 20th? Okay, so that's 22 days, I guess, from tomorrow. So now you'll get an additional 22 days of funding. And hopefully in that time they'll pass an authorization act so we can give out a full year of funding to the states and get on with this business. So, and in our little flow chart we've done, your Authorization Act provides you with contract authority and formulas or other ways of distributing funds. The Appropriations Act provides us with the ob limit and with liquidating cash. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? How many minutes do we have, Kim?
About 20, 15 or 20, but
Oh. Okay, so questions?
what's the difference between FTA and FHWA?
What's the difference between FTA and FHWA? FTA is Federal Transit Administration. And, of course, you know who we are, the FHWA. Federal Transit has their own administrator. They really don't have anything to do with us other than highway funds some highway funds may be transferred over to FTA. Like if UDOT wanted to transfer some STP funds to a transit authority in Salt Lake City, it's a permissible thing to do. But we're two totally separate administrations.
Out of combining you?
No, there's never been any thought. There's one reason is that most of their money is subject to appropriation, which means they have to wait for the appropriators. Well, we're contract authority. That's one big reason there. And I don't know, we don't know anything about them. I imagine they don't know anything about us either, so it'd be tough.
Go back to that last slide.
The last slide, okay.
Still having trouble with the idea of obligations. I meant because it seems to me like once you authorize it and distribute it, it's there to use, isn't it? I mean, it's like there's 2 or 3 other steps in there that don't need to be in there. I mean, once the money is authorized and distributed, isn't it there to be used? Why do you have to do another couple of steps there?
Okay, as once the money's authorized and distributed, isn't it there to use? Yes and no. Don't get mad at me for giving you a goofy answer. It's there, but you need the obligation limit to use it.
They distribute it if you don't have the authorization.
Yeah, it was like you're saying up until 1974. It used to be there was no obligation limit. We distributed funds on October 1, and the states just went and used it, as they felt like it. And what happened was there was a court case because there were a couple presidents that decided that the highway program shouldn't operate like that, and they would do what they called, they'd basically hold the money. And Missouri, we'll blame it on Missouri since they were the ones that did it, they took the situation to court, and actually it was President Ford who had withheld highway funds, and Missouri said that he didn't have any authority to withhold funds because it was up to Congress. So the court sided with Missouri and said a president could not hold funds, but then they gave Congress a slap on the wrist and told them they weren't doing anything to control spending either. So that's when Congress made ob limits. And it's, I think when there's an authorization act, if you look at what the ob limits are for each year, you know the actual program then. If you're looking at the line of credit, unless something strange happens, you're not going to be able to spend all that. You want to look at those ob limits.
So the money that's at the end of the 7%, say, that rolls over,
Right.
Does that roll into a general pot and reallocate it, or does that roll
Now,
into the state?
it rolls over within the state. That's yours to use later on unless Congress has rescissions. Then that's what they take back.
Is that the reason to break it up like that, is just in case they have second thoughts and they need more money?
If they have second thoughts, I guess that could be part of it.
I don't understand why, like, President Ford would hold the money. I don't get what.
Well, his thinking was that when the other presidents that did it too, their thinking was they had to slow down how much money was being spent, even though at that time the trust fund was supporting the highway program entirely. In fact, in 1998, there was a movement in Congress to take the highway program off the budget because the trust fund supported us entirely. So we really weren't taking anything from the budget, But they didn't do it. And of course, I guess we're happy now because I don't know what would have happened if we had needed general fund revenues and we were off the budget. But I always look at the ob limit as what they think the realistic amount of spending is. And the authorized amount, I always think of that's what they'd like to spend. They do this all on projections. Like both bills now, the one in the Senate and the one in the House, are 6-year bills, even though both of them are supposed to shut down after 3 years because they don't know where the money's going to come from. But they project how much income is going to come into the trust fund each of those out years. And that can go any which direction, Well, you only have to get gas to go up to $4 or $5 a gallon, and those projections are down the drain. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird way of doing things, but it's the way we've been doing it. Any other questions? The 3 young ladies back here, you 3 were sitting together in the class, weren't you? I thought so. So no other questions? Okay. If you want to have a copy of the presentation, ask Trevor. Does everybody know who Trevor is? He's the financial manager for the Utah Division of Federal Highways. So, okay, if you don't have any more questions, Kim has more giveaways. And is Tracy going to be the MC again?
Tracy will be it. We want to thank